Every day holds a story. Let's rewind. This is Today Rewound. What if I told you that one wedding ceremony would eventually split a nation from Rome, execute thousands, and reshape the entire Western world? June 11th, 1509. A 17-year-old boy becomes King of England and within 7 weeks marries his dead brother's widow in what might be history's most catastrophic I do. This isn't just another royal wedding story. This is the marriage that would birth the English Reformation, inspire Shakespeare's greatest tragedies, and create a precedent for royal divorce that echoes in headlines today. But here's what nobody talks about. Catherine of Aragon wasn't just some political pawn. She was a warrior queen who would fight the most powerful man in England for over 20 years. Picture this: Greenwich Palace, June 11th, 1509. The morning mist clings to the Thames as servants rush through corridors draped in cloth of gold. But behind the pageantry, something darker lurks. Henry VIII is about to marry a woman who, according to some, he legally cannot wed. A woman who carries secrets that will haunt their marriage from the very first kiss. Catherine of Aragon enters the chapel not as a blushing bride, but as England's most experienced politician. While Henry has been playing with toy soldiers, she's been raised in war councils and royal intrigue. Here's what makes this extraordinary. Catherine was raised by Isabella of Castile, one of history's most formidable military commanders. This wasn't just a marriage between king and subject. This was a collision of two monarchs. But let's rewind to the scandal that made this wedding possible. Catherine's first husband, Arthur, Prince of Wales, died just months after their wedding in 1501. Now here's where it gets interesting. Catherine swore until her dying day that her marriage to Arthur was never consummated, that they were still virgins when he died. Why does this matter? Because marrying your brother's widow was considered problematic by the Catholic Church. Henry needed a papal dispensation just to make this legal. Think about the pressure. Henry VII had already paid Catherine's massive dowry. Sending her back to Spain would mean returning a fortune England desperately needed. So they kept her in England for 7 long years. Not quite a prisoner, not quite a princess. Just waiting. Imagine being Catherine, watching your youth slip away in a foreign court, clinging to the hope that someday you'd wear a crown instead of living in political limbo. The moment 17-year-old Henry VIII took the throne, he made a decision that would echo through history. Within 7 weeks, he chose to marry Catherine. Though deeply fond of her, his decision blended youthful attraction with cold political calculation, legitimizing her long stay in England while securing the massive dowry his father had already spent. Picture their wedding day. Catherine, now 23, finally gets her moment. She is dressed in white satin, her auburn hair flowing beneath a golden circlet. Henry, tall and athletic, the golden prince every girl in Europe dreamed of marrying, takes her hand. The chapel fills with the scent of frankincense and the sound of Latin prayers. Even as they speak their vows, whispers follow them. Is this marriage blessed or cursed? The early years seemed golden. Catherine proved herself not just a wife, but a monarch. When Henry left to wage war in France, he didn't hesitate to name Catherine Regent of England. While he was playing soldier abroad, she was governing the homeland with an iron fist. In 1513, Scottish forces invaded, and Catherine rose to the challenge. As regent, she authorized the mobilization of English forces and oversaw England's defense during Henry's absence. The tactical brilliance belonged to Thomas Howard, Earl of Surrey, but the victory at Flodden Field, where the Scottish king himself was killed, happened under Catherine's regency. She sent Henry a piece of the dead king's blood-stained coat as a trophy. This wasn't your typical medieval wife. This was a ruler who could match Henry's own ruthlessness. Here's a detail that will blow your mind. Catherine was fluent in 6 languages and regularly corresponded with scholars across Europe. While Henry was obsessing over jousting tournaments, Catherine was building diplomatic networks that spanned continents. But then came the heartbreak that would define their marriage. Catherine became pregnant time after time, but child after child was either stillborn or died in infancy. The only survivor was Princess Mary, born in 1516. In an age where queens were valued primarily for producing male heirs, Catherine's body became a battlefield of hope and despair. Each miscarriage wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a political crisis threatening the Tudor dynasty. Then everything changed. Around 1526, whispers began circulating about a young woman catching the king's eye. Anne Boleyn, dark-haired, sharp-tongued, and dangerously ambitious. Refuses to become just another royal mistress. She wants the crown or nothing. Henry, now in his 30s and growing desperate for a male heir, finds himself utterly captivated by a woman who won't give him what he wants. Here's where the story takes its darkest turn. By the 1520s, Henry had convinced himself that his marriage was cursed. He'd become obsessed with Leviticus 20:21, which seemed to forbid marrying a brother's widow. Never mind that he'd needed papal permission to do it in the first place. Now, Henry decided God was punishing him. But here's the twist that reveals Henry's selective reasoning. Catherine's defenders cited Deuteronomy 25:5, which refers to levirate marriage in certain circumstances. Henry simply dismissed any scripture that didn't support his case. The theological argument became his weapon, but everyone knew the real reason. Henry needed Catherine gone so he could marry Anne. What followed was one of the most brutal annulment proceedings in history. The Catholic Church allowed annulments under strict circumstances, but Henry's case lacked sufficient canonical grounds according to Rome. Cardinal Wolsey, once the architect of Henry's rise, had promised to secure the annulment from Pope Clement VII. But the Pope was caught between Henry's demands and pressure from Catherine's nephew, Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor who held the Pope's fate in his armored fist after sacking Rome in 1527. When Wolsey failed to deliver, Henry destroyed him. Once the most powerful man in England after the king, Wolsey was cast aside, proof that even loyalty couldn't survive Henry's need for control. Catherine's response was magnificent in its defiance. When Henry's court convened to hear the annulment case in 1529, she appeared before the assembled judges, fell to her knees before Henry, and delivered one of the most powerful speeches in English history. "Sir, I beseech you, for all the love that hath been between us, let me have justice." She declared herself his true and loyal wife, and begged him to consider her honor. Then she stood up, curtsied, and walked out, never to return to his court again. Picture that moment. The Queen of England, surrounded by men determined to erase her, finding the courage to speak truth to absolute power. Catherine knew she was signing her own death warrant by defying Henry. She'd seen what happened to those who crossed him, but she refused to disappear quietly. Catherine spent her final years under virtual house arrest, still signing her letters Catherine the Queen until the day she died in 1536. Some whispered she'd been poisoned after drinking Welsh ale that allegedly turned black, though historians remain skeptical of these rumors. Whether murder or coincidence, Catherine died as she had lived, defiant to the end. Here's the tragedy nobody talks about. Catherine won the moral victory, but at what cost? Her refusal to accept the annulment forced Henry to break with Rome, establishing himself as head of the English Church. Over the following decades, the English Reformation would claim thousands of lives, revolts, executions, and bitter persecution on both sides of the religious divide. England became a Protestant nation. The entire course of European history shifted because one Spanish princess refused to be erased. And here's the final twist that brings this full circle. When Henry secretly married Anne Boleyn in 1533, he used the exact same justification he'd used for his first marriage, that his authority made it legal. The same religious establishment that had blessed his union with Catherine now condemned his marriage to Anne. Henry had created a system where he could marry and divorce at will, answerable to no one but himself. In an age of swipes and breakups, Catherine's resolve feels like a relic and a reminder. She believed marriage was sacred, permanent, worth fighting for, even when the world told her to surrender. But Catherine of Aragon represents something deeper than just marital fidelity. She chose principle over pragmatism, stared down a king for 20 years, and proved that sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to compromise your truth. Her marriage to Henry VIII didn't just change England. It challenged the very notion of what it means to honor a promise when the stakes are life and death. The girl who married her dead husband's brother on June 11, 1509, became the woman who changed the world by refusing to disappear. And if you think her story was dramatic, the woman who replaced her would face an even darker fate. Anne Boleyn's tale of ambition, betrayal, and the executioner's block makes Catherine's 20-year struggle look like a fairy tale. But that's a story for another day.